well, what do you have to get per client to like meet your overhead? I can't answer that question. And I think anybody who is a business person probably cringes to hear like a business owner admit that. You know what I mean? What I know is I watch the balance of the bank account, and if we can pay rent and pay the employees and everything and keep it fairly steady, then I feel like we're doing good and we've hit a good price point. That's kind of how I have done it. You know, I've gone from a solo provider to having a team and having more people help, which I believe is better. It's definitely an improvement in terms of clients really getting a lot of time and energy out of the whole scenario.
Hey guys, it's Nathan. I am joined today in this episode by Fadwah Halaby, who's a certified nurse midwife practicing in Florida, who has been in this game for longer than most. And she is revered for all of the good reasons, for her variety of leadership roles that she has played in some of the oversight agencies like the ACNM. She has been practicing as a birth worker in the state of Florida and has found her way through the various obstacles to providing equitable care, most notably by being involved in policymaking and advocacy work in the state of Florida and nationally, by helping to organize events like my upcoming 2024 Born Free Twins-Breech Conference, and also experimenting with a variety of different payment models in her own practice. You know, when you're as good as Fadwah is at birth keeping, you can charge a pretty penny, but that isn't necessarily equitable. So Fadwah has actually gone the extra distance in founding a new nonprofit called the Birth Equity Resource, which helps to sort of crowdfund the highest quality care for those families that need it the most. And in the state of Florida, there's a lot of junk, you know, in the policies and the legislation around birth work and autonomy for midwives. Despite acts like EMTALA, you know, where hospitals have to accept and provide quality care to women who are having babies, regardless of their ability to pay, regardless of their chosen, you know, birth plan. Like if they were at home and they transferred to the hospital, Fadwah has seen it all. And we very quickly became friends. I'm going to be going to speak at a function that she is organizing in on the eastern side of the peninsula, the Florida peninsula, here in a couple days at the time of this recording. And I feel just very fortunate to know people like Fadwah because they have been through the ringer. They have tried it all. They have seen it all. And now they're able to put that experience to work in order to help mentor younger midwives, to give them some insights into, let's say, what insurance versus direct pay might look like. Turns out it's kind of a wash, guys, just so you all know. But through her birth equity resource, she kind of found a back door entrance for people to still be sustained through the birth worker of their choice, regardless of what their insurance is willing to pay, who they're willing to play, how they're going to play ball. Her variety of leadership experience is really, really insightful. So I think you're going to love this episode. If you want to meet me and Fadwah at the 2024 Born Free Twins-Breech Conference, you're going to hear from over 20 speakers and presenters and instructors, get plenty of practice on the breech dystocia maneuvers, learn insights on home twins and home triplets births from people like Christine Laria and Stu Fishbein. We're bringing the Spinning Babies crew out. We are bringing the Breech Without Borders crew out, and our two Weavers of Resonance, also known as MCs, Hayes Hawk, who's a traditional midwife, and Savannah Brown, who's the national director of Restore Forward and a Black doula herself. They're going to be MCing this thing and threading in the ceremony and ritual that is at the center of the birthing experience. And this event should be no different. It's going to be a little bit uncomfortable for a lot of people because this is like a variety show of conscious presenters, some very, very thoughtful, sometimes outspoken speakers and authors. This is going to be a very, very revolutionary, very unique event that I don't want you to miss out on. You'll hear a little bit more about that conference, about the midway point of this episode. But Fadwah's going to be there. She's been helping us with the CEU application, given her leadership roles in ACNM, and she's helping to make it one of the more memorable events I think that you've probably ever attended as a birth worker or as a practitioner of any sorts if you're interested in women's health. So Fadwah, her website is midwife360.com. You can find her on Facebook. birthequityresource.org is the nonprofit that I spoke about. This is a wide-ranging conversation. And let me also say, Fadwah is of Palestinian descent, and growing up out even a recognizable home country on many even contemporary US maps is a really confronting thing. And so there's this sort of natural kind of rebellious nature in what Fadwah does, but simultaneously this tender, compassionate, sweet, very approachable person. And if I was going to have a baby, I would love somebody like Fadwah to be there because she just brings the entire package together. So put all of your sort of preconceived notions about what different midwives do, what different midwives are capable of. Fadwah can do it all. And she's got all the tattoos to prove it. Another reason we get along so well. Enjoy my conversation now with Fadwah Halaby. And before I go, let me just give a little plug to our sponsors. WeNatal has the best prenatal on the market. They've got adequate amounts of vitamin D in the right forms of vitamin B12, folate in the form of methylfolate, plenty of choline. It's packed with nutrition. They're also very eco-conscious, so they send you very, very minimally packaged sleeves of vitamins every month. If you go to wenatal.com/beloved and add a bottle of their Omega DHA Plus, you'll get that for free with your prenatal purchase as a gift to you as a listener of the podcast. I can't recommend them enough. Dr. Mark Hyman, one of my mentors in functional medicine, is also behind this product. He helped to formulate it. But the company is small. It's very like family oriented. It's just coming from the heart. And I love that. I love getting out of this like corporate space of supplement manufacturers and getting down to those who are doing the good work. So this is the prenatal vitamin that I introduced to all of my Born Free community members, my Clear and Free community members, all of my clients, all of my midwives. They all know that this is my favorite. And I think you're going to love it. Again, wenatal.com/beloved. Get your free bottle of Omega DHA Plus with any prenatal vitamin purchase. And then we're also supported by ImmuneIntel AHCC. That stands for active hexose correlated compound. It's made from the mycelia of shiitake mushrooms and has been demonstrated through numerous in vivo trials to help support the immune system by upregulating T cells and NK cells, getting all of those immune cells cooperating with one another in order for you to have the strongest innate and acquired immune system possible. I know we're just getting out of that like kind of seasonal flu season, but heaven forbid there's another COVID thing, or you got kids bringing home all those germs from daycare. While I've been taking ImmuneIntel HCC, I haven't gotten sick once. Like maybe like a little GI thing, once in a while for some poultry that we touch the handle of the sink with or whatever, but that just comes and goes. I haven't been like bedridden with high fevers and with just that overall malaise that comes with this. And that's because it actually works. This is a really, really solid product. I take a bottle every 3 to 4 months, just kind of as a part of my routine. But if you have HPV, this product has also been demonstrated to help clear persistent HPV, which of course is probably a consequence of abnormal cells developing in the cervix when the immune system becomes dysregulated, as opposed to the other way around. If you want more information about that, go to clearhpv.com and you'll find my Clear and Free program co-created with Mimi Lindquist, who is behind this supplement. She has brought it directly to the consumers. If you're struggling with HPV, if you're struggling with abnormal PAPs, if you're struggling with any sort of autoimmune condition, gut disorders, whatever, even treatment-resistant epilepsy and early liver cirrhosis, or liver dysfunction, this supplement is a game changer. It's a whole food supplement. It's made in the highest quality ways. And the people behind it, Chase and Mimi, who I've mentioned, they are just those, they are the types of people that are doing work because they know it's good work to do. And there's not even a profit margin. It's a very, very minuscule profit margin on this product, but they're still offering you a discount because they want to get this into the hands of as many people as possible, which is why I love having their product as a supporting sponsor of the show. If you want to try this out, go to themedicine.com. That's THEMEDICIN, no E at the end.com. Use code beloved10. You'll save 10% on your bottle of Immune Intel HCC. And if you are working with HPV right now, you're struggling with this whole cervical pathology thing, buy 3 or 4 bottles and just take it, 2 to 3 capsules twice a day until they're gone. And I am almost certain that when you show back up at your OBGYN's clinic, if you're also taking care of your stress mitigation, your sleep, you're getting nutritious food into your body, you're going to end up with a clean bill of health. I can almost guarantee it. I don't ever guarantee things, but this product works so well, especially in conjunction with healthy lifestyle modifications. So themedicine.com, no E at the end of medicine. Use code beloved10. You'll save 10%. Thank you to both of these companies for keeping the lights on here. This is a passion project. I am not making money off of this podcast. I just have a couple sponsors to help offset some of the costs, not all of the costs, but some of the costs. And it is a great, it's a great pleasure to be able to continue bringing conversations like this one you're about to hear with Fadwah to every podcast platform. We're also on YouTube. Go there, subscribe. You can see Fadwah in the flesh, so to speak. You can just appreciate what a lot of these guests are really bringing into the world. And that's why I'm very, very selective as to who I bring on. And you're going to love Fadwah. So without further ado, here's Fadwah Halaby, CNM in Florida, talking about all of the things that are relevant to this maternity crisis that we're all facing here in the United States. Fadwah Halaby is in the studio with me, and I wanted to share, for those who don't really appreciate who you are, I just wanted to share how you and I met. I hosted a Twins-Breech Conference in Louisville back in 2023, and you were the very last person to jump on as an attendee. And you were like, I'll do whatever I need to do to get there. And I said, you know what, let me squeeze you in. You were coming from the state of Florida, which doesn't have, let's just say it's not doing all that great with its maternity statistics. And I just had this sense about you. And so I met you at the conference and we connected immediately. And what I didn't realize is that I was in the presence of somebody who's been doing really, really good work for a very long time in a very, very hard state in which to operate. We'll just say that about Florida, which we'll get into in a bit. But what I didn't, some other attributes of you, Fadwah, that I didn't appreciate is that you are the daughter of Palestinian immigrants, and you have had, sort of a wrestling, I'm sure, and you can speak to this, with the identity politics of being Palestinian. And I don't think I need to venture too far here for people to appreciate what I'm trying to say. But then, of course, as a birth worker, like birth workers themselves are struggling with identity right now in the United States for a lot of reasons that we're going to get into. So it's almost like the rebellious nature of birth work, it just seems like a perfect fit for you. So at any rate, you're helping us plan this upcoming 2024 Born Free Twins-Breech Conference. And I just am very, very excited to be able to support you in the ways that I have. So Fadwah, welcome to the podcast. Anything that I started with there that you want to comment on?
Sure. So my father, it was a Palestinian immigrant, came over with his family at the age of 16. And he met my mother when he was in college. He actually went to college straight away because he qualified for it. And there was a college that would accept him. So he was a very young college student, I think, at the age of 16. And so my mother is American. And I was raised in a household where, while I knew that I was Palestinian, my father came from Palestine. We visited the Middle East and the Holy Lands when I was a teenager. There wasn't a lot of sort of national pride or homeland education. It was a time where immigrants were really trying their best to be good Americans and speak English and give their kids American names. My first name is actually Paula. That's what the P stands for. But he did give us Arabic middle names. And at some point when I was in my early 20s, I decided to bring that identity forward because I didn't want it to get lost. And I felt like that was how I wanted to present to the world. So that's it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm sure people are going to be, wondering if you can speak to the resurgence of conflict. It seems like an never-ending conflict in the region that some people would view as Israel, some people would view it as Palestine, some people would recognize this term Gaza Strip. Palestine is actually a composite of territories, from Syria, Lebanon, and what is now known as the state of Israel. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's gone through multiple changes in the configuration of the borders for sure. But at the time that Israel was formed, it was just getting released from being sort of owned by Great Britain. And they were just beginning, they were a fledgling country, just barely beginning to take over their own affairs when a few people got together and decided that this would be a good place for the Jews to be able to go fleeing the persecution in Europe. And so, without really consulting with the Palestinian people, they just decided that they would take that land. And then there was a very um, prescribed and definite like push to just push the people out. And then sort of a myth that was then propagated that the Jewish people were a people without a land, and they were given a land without a people. And that sort of myth has been propagated that this land, the land of Israel, was empty when the Jewish people, when it became Israel. And that was the Nakba, or the great disaster for the Palestinian people. And since then have been struggling to gain a sense of international identity and a land. The lands that they've been awarded are bits and pieces that aren't contiguous, and so it's very difficult to like run a country or do anything like that when you have land like that. The most recent resurgence is horrifying in just the brutality of it, and there's been so much loss on both sides, but so many Palestinians, they're just trying to just completely ruin Gaza for human habitation. And it's, it's, like I said, horrifying. And it's really hard to understand how it can just continue on and on. But
Yeah.
it seems like it is. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's in for those who are interested in learning more about this. You mentioned one of Betty Ann Davis and Robbie Davis Floyd's book, "Birthing Models on the Human Rights Frontier: Speaking Truth to Power." Did you mention that there's a chapter in that book on the the issues with birth within the region?
there is. And I want to say that Betty Ann told me that she was so um, moved by the connections between the Palestinian midwives and the Israeli midwives that it seems like really around the subject of birth and helping women, there are no borders. You know, there's a coming together and a meeting of minds, and I believe that they're trying to work together to help each other. So
Wow.
I can't wait to get to that part of the book, and I'm really, it makes me happy that is happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I think when people hear about these conflicts, it sometimes it feels tempting to just pick a side and to want to if to other another group of people. And this is something that is not just relevant for these catastrophic conflicts where people are getting blown up and women can't find compassionate healthcare or a midwife to help attend their birth. I mean, I can't imagine being 7 months pregnant and then this conflict erupts, and now you're wondering, how am I going to even safely bring a baby into the world? When we put humans back at the center of this conversation, it becomes actually quite clear what needs to happen, which is going to be led by love and peace and light, not casting stones at the person you think is wrong, even if they are objectively wrong based on whoever's definition is of wrongness. There's never a situation in which I could walk up to somebody and punch them and they're going to be like, okay, I'm on your side now. Like, it just doesn't work like that. It just perpetuates more violence. Or maybe their children are going to now, come to my doorstep and want to, avenge their family member or whatever. So the reason I'm bringing this up is that within the birthwork community, there's quite a bit of what I would call horizontal violence. You might have your own terminology for it. But if we're going to fix this very, very corrupted, let's just call it the maternity care system in the United States, midwives are also casting stones at one another. There's licensed and unlicensed. There's professional and unlicensed. There's radical, whatever, traditional or classical midwives, like all these different terms. And it's almost this factioning off, it seems. I just recently experienced this in Mississippi when I lent some support against a bill that was going to minimize autonomous practice of midwifery. And, as long as we're all just trying to feel superior to others, we're losing sight of the human element of this experience of birth, but also our role as I don't know, birth supporters, birth attendants, whatever you want. What do you have to say about this? I mean, this is a big problem, I think, in many parts of the United States.
Yeah, it is. I personally feel like I'm not pro licensing necessarily, like everybody has to be licensed. I don't know how to answer the question of is licensing good
Yeah.
or bad for the public. I'd like to think that licensing is a good thing because then you know that you've got people who have at least a basic level of education. But in the older I get and the more experience I have in the world, people that you would expect to perform at a certain level just don't sometimes,
Right.
for
Right.
whatever reason. And is it a lack in their education? Is it a lack in their experience? Is it a lack in continuing education? I don't really know what it is, but um, it's it's almost like the consumer needs to do their due diligence in terms of reviews, really meeting the person, asking some hard questions, talking to them, asking what would you do in this instance, what would you do in that instance. And unfortunately that puts such an onus on the consumer to know about things that they don't
Right.
typically know about. And so um, I personally know of some midwives in the community where, they have this reputation for being super hands off, which sounds like probably a good thing. But then you listen to women who had experiences with them, and it's almost like the hands off is just really a euphemism for don't know. And so that's scary
Right.
too,
Right. Right.
So it's like I don't know, I saw something recently that talked about hands off, and talked about how you can't be a hands off provider until you really fully understand what hands on is.
Yeah.
And so that what you're not doing.
Right. Right.
And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
and these
Mm.
people are, and this particular person is licensed. So what does that mean? And then I've met traditional midwives who refuse to get licensed, that are very capable birth attendants, and I would recommend them to people. So it's so hard to really know what you're getting, I guess. And the only way, I'll repeat, is to look at reviews, read reviews, talk to people who've worked with that person to really try to
Right.
fully understand what you're getting.
Yeah, I know exactly the video that you're talking about, and I thought it was very important messaging there. Which, another thing to add to that is a lot of people advertise, I've never had a complication. Well, if you haven't had a complication, you haven't been to enough births. Like, it's going to happen, and until you're the primary person there that has to help this birthing family navigate that complication, you probably don't necessarily even have. I'm presuming a lot here, but you may not have the chops to be advertising the complement of services without maybe another midwife there to support you in your endeavor. Now, I'm not saying that there's a right or wrong way to do it. I'm not even saying that I am necessarily the best. In fact, I've gotten really good at getting people to hire midwives by convincing them that I am probably not the best person. Somebody like Fadwah might be, but Fadwah's also been to how many? I mean, I don't really keep count anymore, but how many do you think you've been to? Like hundreds,
Around
thousands?
2100.
Okay, so you're probably one of the more experienced midwives still in practice in the United States. We'll just call it what it is. Um, if you've been to 2,100 births, you've probably seen your fair share of babies that need resuscitation, or, the variations of meconium. You've probably seen some really long protracted labors. You've probably seen some precipitous labors. You've probably seen some breech births. And when you've been, presented with the full complement of those scenarios, and you've demonstrated your skills to yourself and to your clients, and you've learned from mistakes, then you can say, you know what, I don't really have to touch, because I've seen that oftentimes when I touch, it gets in the way and causes problems. But also, you sort of earn this privilege of being able to sit back and only intervene when you absolutely feel like it's necessary. And that's, I think, that to me is the midwife I want to hire for my birth. But it's hard to put that on paper. And that's why the licensure may reflect that. But you could give up your license and still be Fadwah Halaby, who's gone to 2,100 births, So this is a complicated conversation. We're not going to get to the sort of, we're not going to solve this one in this hour-long conversation. But I do know that your practice is changing quite a bit. I'm one of your supportive physicians. They call it a collaborative physician or supervising physician or whatever, but I'm not really supervising. It's one of these state requirements in many states that midwives of any type have a physician there to back them up. What is going on? And remember, we have international listeners here. So every midwife in the world is going to be confronted with some of these dilemmas at some point. But in the state of Florida, which has the third worst maternal and neonatal mortality, if I recall, next to, I think, Mississippi and Louisiana, maybe, or Arkansas, one of those. Anyways, what is happening in Florida? And I'd like for you to bring in this tension between out of hospital and in hospital birth workers through certain acts that were actually meant to support sort of bridging this gap, like EMTALA. Can you talk a little bit about EMTALA and why, for whatever reason, even though we have these policies in place, it still seems like there's this crazy conflict between the out of hospital and in hospital birth workers?
Okay, so I will talk about EMTALA, but let me just say, so Florida has two different licensures for midwives. They have the CPM, Certified Professional Midwife, in the state of Florida is called the licensed midwife. And the licensed midwife is overseen by the Department of Health, and there is a organization called the Council of Midwifery within the Department of Health that oversees the licensed midwives, disseminates the licenses, and deals with complaints and things like that. In the other group is nurse midwives, and the nurse midwives are they're bound by the Nurse Practice Act, and they're under the Board of Nursing. The Board of Nursing,
Right.
keeps tabs on them, licenses them, deals with complaints against the license, et cetera, et cetera. Until about a week ago, we nurse midwives did have to have a supervising physician. We have now achieved the fix of the language. So a couple years ago, we became autonomous as nurse practitioners in general in the state of Florida, meaning they could practice without the supervising physician. However, for nurse midwives, they kept in that language, certain language that said we had to have a doctor agree to be our collaborator, and we had to have a hospital agree to take our clients. And this is where I'll talk about EMTALA.
Yeah.
But for a couple of years, we tried to like fight it, and we were successful finally. About a week, maybe 2 weeks ago, they passed the bill that takes out the restrictive language. And so now nurse midwives, just like all of the other nurse practitioners in the state of Florida, if they qualify, can now be autonomous. I have qualified for that when it first became an option. And so now I am fully autonomous. I believe that my next step will be to apply once again for hospital privileges, get denied for lack of a supervising physician, because that's what the bylaws say, and then sue the hospital so that they can change the
Oh,
bylaws. Like, I feel like that may be the next step. But the hospitals are all private entities, even though they get a lot of government funds, but they don't apparently have to have the same rules as the state, until I think maybe somebody tells them that they maybe they'll lose some money if they don't change their rules or something like that. Who knows? So that's going to be sort of the next thing that I'm going to try to tackle. But EMTALA, the reason that the provision for having to have a hospital sign an agreement with you is that back in 1986, the federal government, it was an act of Congress, that's abbreviated as COBRA, and I can tell you what that stands for. But anyways, through the COBRA Act, um, Congress created this rule called EMTALA, and it stands for Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act. And basically,
Yep.
what that means is that it applies to basically emergency rooms and labor and delivery units, which, as everyone who works in one knows, is kind of like an emergency room for pregnant people. So the law basically says that a person, a client, a patient who shows up at the hospital in either the emergency room or in labor and delivery triage has to have a medical screening and has to be treated. And if they're going to be transferred out, it's with the permission of the patient, and it's because they're going to a more appropriate facility. Before this happened, hospitals could pick and choose who they treated. And so if you walked into the emergency room because you cut your finger off and they didn't like the insurance that you had, they could tell you to go to the hospital down the street, instead of treating you. And so the government passed a law to prevent hospitals from doing that. So you have to get treated. And so that's how it works. When home birth midwives have to transfer to the hospital, we go to whatever hospital's the closest to the client's house, or whatever hospital they prefer to go to, depending on if it's an emergency or not. And the hospital has to take them if they have a labor and delivery unit, even if they would rather send them to whatever hospital the midwife has their backup doctor at, which is kind of what they try to do. It's gotten better. They've sort of gotten used to us at this point, because I make a point of educating them every time they ask me who our backup doctor is. I'll tell them that's really irrelevant. Our client wants to come to this hospital. We're here. Can we speak to your hospitalist or to whoever's on call? And so in our area, the hospitals have all gone to, except for one that I know of, have gone to the model of care where they have hospitalists, or what they call laborists, in-house. And say 5 years ago, it wasn't like that. You would have private doctor groups had to take turns covering the ER for labor and delivery, so to speak. And if someone showed up without a doctor, like a home birth client, they would just get whatever private doctor happened to be on call. And those were always not as good of transfers, because those doctors were always pretty grumpy to come in to the hospital to take care of somebody that they didn't know. With the hospitalists, it's a little different. They're already there. They're there 24/7. We're
Yeah.
giving them something to do. So
I've served that role. That's actually that was the only way I worked after residency, was as a hospitalist. And it was kind of an ultimate test of my skills. I have to build rapport and trust really quickly. I have to understand their story. I have to understand why they're here and where we're going. And so the hospitalist OBGYNs tend to be like, they chose that job for a reason. And so they tend to be, I don't know, in general, in my experience, pretty good people. But
yeah.
so this EMTALA Act, basically, so this notion that you can show up at the hospital and they can refuse to treat you is actually forbidden as a consequence of this act in every hospital in the country. Is that right?
So as long as they do receive money from the CMS or Medicaid and Medicare, and I think that there's very few, if any, hospitals
Yeah.
that don't participate in that program.
Okay. Gotcha. Wow. Wow. Amazing. So, okay. So we've got this EMTALA Act. It says that people have to treat you, if you show up at the hospital. But what is your experience in Florida hospitals? And by the way, let me also mention for those listening, this is not just Florida we're talking about. You happen to sit on one of the, what is it called? The Home and Birth Center Committee, as the chairperson at ACNM, which stands for what again? The American College of
Nurse Midwives.
Nurse Midwives. Okay. So, let's say that anywhere in the country, a person goes into the hospital, but they were laboring at home and this midwife is worried about that transfer. First off, let's talk about the issue with this apprehension to transfer. And then what is an experience that some midwives have maybe discussed with you, or that you've had yourself, as to the consequence of hospitals not readily accepting clients transferring from the home, despite the fact that this EMTALA Act is in place?
So I think that the net effect of the what we're talking about is a lack of integration. And so integration is a really important piece when you're talking about home birth, because you're talking about birth in one setting and then sometimes having to transfer to another setting. And so it works best when there's some kind of communication between those two settings and a certain level of respect and rapport. And so in the state of Florida, even though midwifery has been legal for a long time, home birth midwifery, and I'm actually a certified nurse midwife, so most of my colleagues are working in the hospital. I'm actually the only nurse midwife in my whole county that's doing home birth, and Palm Beach County is
Wow.
really big. Um, so most of the midwives have been the licensed midwives, and I think that they have a bit of a handicap because most of them don't have a lot of experience in the hospital. So even going into the hospital at all is a little bit scary, and they feel like they're being judged, which really I think has been the case in the past. And so the net effect of that is that sometimes transfers don't happen
Yeah.
in a timely manner. So there's this whole, it's like a circular kind of problem where hospital personnel complain that clients are brought to them or dropped off on their doorstep. And there's this concept of the train wreck, that, any home birth transfer is a train wreck. And that maybe that some of these hospital providers have experienced that, have experienced like someone getting quote unquote dumped on them with a situation that if it had been attended to sooner would have a different outcome. And now we're in this place where we really don't have much options except maybe to do a cesarean section, and then everybody's all up in arms that, oh, that's all the hospitals want to do, but sometimes
Right.
their hands are tied. And so as a nurse midwife who's worked in the hospital for many years, I'm comfortable in that situation. So I don't have so much of a problem. If we have to transfer, it is nerve wracking. It is kind of embarrassing sometimes. And you have to fight this feeling of shame that you've been doing something wrong, trying to have a baby at home. And they don't understand that the majority of our clients birth at home. We never see them for these clients. Our transfer rate in my practice, Midwife 360, is right about 10%. I just finished doing my benchmarking for 2023, and that's what the statistics show. So we had 10% of our clients transfer, and that is what the national average is. So I feel like we're doing okay. We're doing what we should be doing. Um, and so even so, just the transfers that we have had, there's a whole gamut of how we experience how we're received in the hospital.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's amazing, and we get to do a midwife to midwife transfer, and the client feels held and respected and listened to, and they get their vaginal birth or they don't get their vaginal birth, and either way they understand that everything was done to that end and in the way that they want it to happen. To the other extreme, I can remember one time we were going to transfer. Almost most of the transfers are for long labors and maternal exhaustion, so it's not a big emergency. And I called the hospital to try to the hospital that she chose. And when they finally connected me to the obstetrician, he wouldn't even talk to me. He said, I'm an ACOG fellow and I don't believe in home birth. And she overheard that, and she's like, well, I don't want to go to that hospital anyways. So I was like, okay, that's really not
So hang on.
appropriate, but we won't be coming.
Let,
So
let's let's pause. Let's unpack what you just said. I don't believe in home birth. Like, is this a religion? Like, are we all
yeah.
a bunch of like pagans that are out there in the woods doing rituals? I don't believe in that stuff. Or are you saying you're not willing, doctor, to recognize that women are often feeling safer at home in the care of a midwife who, quote, has inferior credentials to you, and they're foregoing all of the quote safety measures that you offer in the hospital. So what you're saying, doctor, is that you don't believe in this thing that people are doing as a consequence of not trusting or feeling comfortable with you, which is really, that's shit. Like, that is why I think, in summary, our maternity care system is so out of whack.
Yeah. And not to mention the fact that his beloved ACOG has a
Mhm.
statement that supports home birth with a nurse midwife in an integrated system. So no thank you for not helping us integrate the system, that your college is recommending that we have
Yeah,
in order to make home birth even safer for people,
right,
so
right. Right. I think one of the Fadwa, one of the silver linings, so to speak, of the COVID moment was that so many women were feeling compelled, including my own wife, in feeling compelled to have a baby at home because of all the stuff that we were hearing about babies being taken away due to positive swabs, and the swabbing during labor, and then the masks and all this other stuff. Like, I don't even care to get into COVID. It's not useful to me right now. But given that women weren't going in every 4 weeks for an ultrasound and they were actually feeling compelled to have a home birth, what we saw was an uptick in home births, and we didn't see a whole bunch of bad stuff. In fact, we saw improved outcomes. So ACOG is going to have to face the music. Science is not a belief system. Data speaks for itself when we end up with these controversial things. And ACOG, as you've said, has pretty clearly stated that in an integrated model, in skilled hands, home birth is probably a wash with hospital birth, if not better. That'll be the next iteration of their statement. But I'll include a link to the committee opinion 697, planned home birth, which dates back way before COVID. This is from ACOG. I'll include that in the show notes for people that are interested in checking that out.
And I'd also like to point out that you may have the numbers more readily available than I do in my brain right now, but we have some of the worst maternal and infant mortality statistics in the world. And
Yeah.
yet we have this culture that spends so much money on healthcare. And, if you look at the statistics, home birth is still less than 2%. So our terrible statistics are not as a result of home birth, right? We are not contributing to that
Right.
on any major level. So, like you said, possibly if we had more home birth, those numbers would get better.
Right, right.
So,
And if a woman is compelled to have a home birth, a lot of what we teach in the Born Free method is, listen, there's no guarantee that you're going to end up with this path or this path, but if you have to take a beeline to the hospital, we should not have any reason in the world to avoid the hospital, because the hospital can be very helpful in certain situations. But for the reasons we've already mentioned, if a midwife is apprehensive due to some punitive measures or the illusion of punitive measures, which makes them apprehensive about transferring, then you end up truly with maybe a catastrophe that could have been completely prevented had these models been better integrated.
yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
Mm. What sort of things, every state has different restrictions as to what midwives can do. And this is where I think licensing is fraught with issues. It's not like, hey, we trust that you've done 80 births or whatever as an apprentice. We now can give you a license to cut hair or to do births or whatever. There's often language put in, and this is why some people are pushing back hard on licensing. It'll say, yes, you can do it, but you have to play by our rules. So you can't attend twins, you can't attend breech, you can't attend a history of prior C-section. What is the story in Florida around those three in particular?
So it's interesting. The licensing midwife, if you go to the Council of Midwifery website, they're promoting VBAC for licensed midwives, which I think is very interesting, who don't ever, in the state of Florida, they are not allowed to be hospital midwives. So they're promoting VBAC in the out of hospital setting. As far as twins and breeches go, they're not allowed. Neither are birth centers allowed to have twins or breeches in the birth center or VBAC. And so, and many women who have tried to get a VBAC can tell you that it's very difficult to get that in the hospital system because of some nefarious practices with some OBs where they do this bait and switch thing where they'll say yes, 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 and then you get to 39 weeks and they say, oh, but you have to have your baby now. And if you don't, we're going to induce you, and that doesn't turn out so well sometimes. So the best option for getting a VBAC would be for a home birth. Um, and so you're kind of forced to be out of the hospital. And the same thing happens with the breech. A woman ends up with a breech baby at the end of pregnancy. If we can't turn the baby, then they have no options. And that's the thing that really is difficult to live with, is you have to have two two choices in order to have an option. But a woman with a breech baby in our system, in most places, and especially in Florida, the only option is a cesarean section. And so they're again forced to have their baby at home if they want to try to have a vaginal birth. As far as the rules for nurse midwives, the Nurse Practice Act is wonderfully vague. And it says that you practice to the extent of your training and your experience, and which I believe is the way that it should be. Um, I do breeches and twins. I've transferred breeches in. I've transferred planned breeches in, not just breeches that were identified during labor and the
Sort of
mom
surprise
changed her
breach.
mind.
Yeah.
Um, and I have not had any kind of fallout. I mean, I don't know if I should be knocking on wood right now or what, but I don't know if it's the way that I conduct myself during the whole story, or how it goes. But I feel blessed that I haven't had to decide whether I want to keep my license or not, over this issue, because I would probably let it go, in favor of being able to continue to support the type of clients that I choose to support. The same thing goes for multiple C-sections. You know, women have had 2 or more C-sections. They can be nearly impossible to find a doctor to support them. And I've been able to support a couple of women with 4 previous cesareans and had that birthed beautifully.
Yeah.
And several with 3 and multiple with 2. So, you know, I'm glad that we're able to do that.
Yeah, I want to give people, an illustration of why when we see things so black and white, that this gets us in trouble from a policy making standpoint. If you were to say, we do not permit vaginal, a try of labor after 2 C-sections or more. Let's say more than 2 C-sections, right? We'll do the VBA2C, but we're not going to honor a desire for a VBA3C. Here's the issue. I had one of my collaborative midwives. You're in my midwife collaborator program, and some of the midwives that I work with, they call me pretty frequently because they're working with some pretty interesting scenarios. Like, for example, a Mennonite woman who's had 8 pregnancies. She's had 4 C-sections and then 3 vaginal births after those C-sections, and now she's pregnant with her 8th. But here's the kicker: one of those 4 C-sections was a classical incision for a preterm birth. And she still had 3 successful home birth after C-section experiences. So how does that fit into this policy of no more than 2 C-sections? Because she has clearly demonstrated that she's fine. In fact, that's a case report. I told the midwife, like, you got to write this up because people need to know, not that this is the end all be all to the conversation, but to say that you are doomed if you've had 2 C-sections of uterine rupture, it's simply not true. So when we put a policy in place that has no wiggle room, we're really limiting the options for women to avoid more cesareans or more complications from their cesareans, not to mention all the issues of maternal fetal bonding, the breastfeeding issues. I mean, the postpartum recovery after a C-section when you have 7 other kids, are you kidding me? So anyways, all of this is to say that sometimes policies are good, sometimes they're not so good. And I'm so happy to hear that somebody like you, who shows up as a person with her own autonomy, is on a planning committee at ACNM and working through some of the legislative policies that are relevant not just for Florida, but also the rest of the United States.
So yeah, the Home Birth and Birth Center Committee of the American College of Nurse Midwives. I have been the chairperson of that for. I'm in my second year, um, and I'm going to tell you. I'm going to be honest with you. We're struggling right now to maintain active membership in this committee. We have an ongoing meeting once a month, and in the last few meetings have been just a couple of people show up, everybody part of the okay, so did you know that manna is no more? Did
No,
you
I
know that?
didn't. Well, I didn't find any stats on their website recently when I was writing this letter for the state of Mississippi. And
They
I was like,
have their
what the hell's
website
going
is
on?
closed, I believe.
Wow. Shut down.
So the Midwives Alliance of North America was an organization. I don't know when they started. I should have. I didn't have time to really prep for that with this talk, but we can do this another time. But anyways, they've been active for many years. I don't know how long, but a long time. And they bring together all the midwives, the certified professional midwives and the nurse midwives, the traditional birth attendants. They have been really the one place where like everybody could come and be together and talk about issues and things like that. Well, they are no longer. So I was listening to a podcast recently talking about that closure and what that means to several midwives. And, it's really like, it's so sad that this has happened because, but part of the reason that it happened is because you know, we practicing midwives are busy. They're taking care of clients in the office. They're on call. I mean, I have a team and I'm still super busy. I'm only on call every third week for a week, and I'm still so busy that sometimes it's hard for me to do some of this other stuff, the political
Yeah.
work, the stuff like to try to like move forward in the integration and all of that, and then this meeting. So I attend the meeting because I'm the chairperson every month, but I get it why our attendance is low, and midwives have a hard time doing it all. Okay, which
Wow.
like
Yeah.
is that a big surprise? And so there went manna, and it's really
Wow.
a
I didn't
shame.
know that. I didn't know that. Wow. Well, Fadwa, let's take a very, very short break, and we're going to come back, and we're going to get into your practice, Midwife 360, and why you've transitioned from a largely insurance model to now a direct pay model. We'll get into some data and some numbers from the state of Florida. I'll see you back here in a few minutes. Okay. Hey guys, it's Nathan. Wanted to interrupt this amazing conversation very briefly to talk to you, specifically if you're a birth worker. This goes for doulas, childbirth educators, midwives of all sorts, whether you're out of hospital or in hospital, and especially the OBGYNs, the family medicine docs, those of you who are attending to births. I want you to ask yourself, if a person rolls into your practice and they're in labor and there's a bud emerging from the vagina, what are you going to do? What I was taught to do was, let's rush you to the operating room. Forget about informed consent. We have to do this through the abdomen. We have to do a C-section because the baby is breech. But frankly, I think a lot of women, rightfully so, want to avoid C-section, unnecessarily, of course. And so if you were to just rely on let's say your OBGYN residency training, you're not going to have the skills to attend to a breech birth. The good news is most breech babies come out without any intervention at all. But in the rare chance that they have a nuchal arm or a hyperextended neck or whatever, you want to have those skills. And it requires practice on practice on practice to get those skills, which is why I started hosting an annual conference here in Louisville. And in 2024, we're going to be leveling up this entire program. This is the 2024 Born Free Twins-Breech Conference, where you're going to be able to get plenty of simulator experience with very, very well-trained educators and instructors. You're going to hear from a variety of midwives and some doctors. Um, This year, we're featuring the Spinning Babies team, Breach Without Borders team. Stu Fishbine's going to be there. Christine Laria is coming with the Breach Without Borders team. She was a recent addition. Carol Gauchi from the Pacific Northwest is coming. We're also bringing 2 keynote speakers, Machilo Motse, who's a newly crowned PhD from South Africa, as well as Doña Angelina Martinez Miranda from Cuernavaca, Mexico, is coming. These are instructors that have quite a breadth of knowledge and experience in order to help round out your own education. I haven't even mentioned Tracy Vogel, who's an OB anesthesiologist. She's going to be coming in to talk about trauma-informed care. Hermine Hayes-Klein is coming to speak to informed consent. There is so much that we're offering here, and I've only gotten to the didactics part. There's going to be plenty of time to practice on very realistic mannequins. And there are going to be some other activities for you to do some healing and as a means of community building. So we're going to do some trauma release work, a musical odyssey with Rebecca Kelly G. There's going to be some ecstatic dance in the mornings. If you're open to that, it can be very, very releasing because we've suppressed so much of this stuff throughout our lives that if we can't use our voice and our bodies in an expressive way, it's going to become a second chakra issue. It's going to impact our reproductive organs and our overall health. We're going to be screening Aftershock and having a panel discussion with Shawnee Benton Gibson and Omari Maynard, both of whom were featured in the film because Omari's wife, who is also Shawnee's daughter, she died as the result of what I would call medical negligence due to the color of her skin in the medical system. And that's what Aftershock, the film, is all about. We're going to do a breathwork shop with Sarah Tremoli of Effigy Breath. There is just so much healthy food, healthy community, healthy conversation in a very, very safe space. No breakout sessions. You're all going to be in the same room together in a very intimate setting, which I think is very, very important for this work. If you're interested in coming, go to bornfreetwinsbreech.com. Register as early as you can because the price will gradually increase as we get closer and closer to the event. There are a few opportunities available for work exchange for students or people who are otherwise unable to attend for financial reasons. But everything will be on site at the Omni Hotel in downtown Louisville, a beautiful hotel with some very, very beautiful meals and beautiful spaces that we're all going to be sharing together. I hope to see you in Louisville. The dates are August 8th through the 11th with an opportunity to do either NRP certification or a simulator intensive workshop with one of our instructors on the 12th if you want to stick around. And for those who stick around, maybe there'll be some other goodies along the way. BornFreeTwinsBreech.com. I hope to see you in Louisville. All right, Fadwah, let's, given everything we've talked about, obviously your practice has probably evolved over time. I looked up some data ahead of this call to look at the average cost of childbirth in the United States. And typically what happens is, 98% of births are in the hospital. So what happens is the hospital will send a bill to your insurance company, and that average bill is it's over $18,000. Now, what that ends up equating to is around this is for a vaginal birth, around $2,600 for a vaginal birth or $3,200 or so for cesarean. This is nationwide. And if we look at Florida, Florida's like pretty darn average. It's about a little over $2,000 out of pocket for a vaginal birth. But the issue here with insurance is that you're going to be paying premiums. Then you're going to have to meet your deductible before the insurance even kicks in. There's going to be co-pays along the way. There's just a whole bunch of other expenses. And the reason that ticket, that $18,000 ticket is being sent to the insurance company is because it's a negotiation between the hospital and the insurance company so that the hospital can reap as much money as possible from that birth. Now, this is not something that's driven by the midwife in the hospital or the OB/GYN in the hospital. This is the bean counters in the back room, and the physicians get their salary. There's usually a package of money that goes to the practice. It's the hospital that's actually negotiating these prices. So if you were to look at the average cost of midwifery care, do you have any idea what that value is to have a home birth for the whole package?
I mean, I know what we charge people, but in terms of what it costs, it's really hard for me. I came into this not as a business owner with previous experience, but as a midwife who wanted to do home birth. And so, you learn as you go. at least in my case. And so I was asked multiple times early on, like, well, what do you have to get per client to like meet your overhead? I can't answer that question. And I think anybody who is a business person probably cringes to hear like a business owner admit
That's right.
that. You know what
That's
I
right.
mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
What I know is I watch the balance of the bank account, and if we can pay rent and pay the employees and everything and keep it fairly steady, then I feel like we're doing good and we've hit a good
Yeah.
price point. That's
Yeah.
kind of how I have done it. And so we have, I've gone from a solo provider to having a team and having more people help, which I believe is better. It's definitely an improvement in terms of clients really getting a lot of time and energy out of the whole
Oh yeah.
scenario. And so the price that we have is 8,000 at this point.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I actually think that's fair because, if you're comparing these two types of payment models, you have to consider you're getting kind of the bottom of the barrel of maternity care when you go to the hospital. I'm not saying hospitals aren't good. I'm not saying OBGYNs aren't well trained. I'm not saying people who work in the hospital are stupid or incompetent. That's not at all what I'm saying. But if you're just there monitoring the baby, giving the shots, doing the medications, yeah, it's expensive to run a hospital. So they do need to get more money. But your prenatal visits are what, 7 minutes on average? You're not getting nearly any postpartum care. And oftentimes you have to advocate for the things you don't want as much as you have to advocate for the things that you do want. And the reason for that is, and maybe you can, just wax poetic with me on this, a midwifery led childbirth experience is going to be very, very different. It's comparing apples to oranges with what you get in the way I was trained in the hospital system. So you're going to get longer visits. You're going to get more frequent visits if you need it. You're going to have somebody you can call directly if you need them. You're going to have somebody advising you every step of the way, not somebody, an operator, basically answering the phone and saying, you got to come in, you got to come in, you got to do this test, you got to do the monitoring. It's going to be like, okay, well, here's the possible scenarios. What would you like to do? That's sort of in general what the midwifery model of care looks like. Can you just, act like I'm a complete stranger to what midwives do? I've received this cultural milieu of characterizations of what midwives are and are not, and I'm not sold. So, what is the beauty of midwifery care compared to this model that your insurance company might pay for
Yeah.
in the hospital?
So well, you have to go back to what is birth in the human experience. And birth in the human experience actually it's a spiritual experience. Okay. Um, Women do it very few times. Some women do it 10 maybe times, and maybe there's some out there having 20 babies, but that's rare. So women do it a few times in their life, and for the baby, you're born once. This is an experience that you have coming through into this world one time. And it's not a medical event unless it becomes that. And so, in general, if you pay attention to your health, your lifestyle, what you eat, and how you move through your day, you will, and you don't have any underlying medical problems, then your pregnancy and birth is not a medical event. And so that's why we can do this at home. We most of birth doesn't need the bells and whistles that they have at the hospital, which we're so happy are there, because when we do need them, we need to be able to walk through the door and access that level of care, and in order to have the best outcome for the mom and the baby. But unfortunately, in our medical culture, we have this very low bar for the experience of birth for the families and the babies being born. And I contend that is something that actually really does need to be paid attention to. If we want to have a more beautiful world, a more peaceful world, we need to pay attention to how babies are coming in and treating them with love and respect, and the mothers, and helping them feel autonomous and feel like they are empowered from this experience rather than beaten down. This is a human that's got to raise another human being, and we want that
Right.
that human to be at to feel the best about herself and the experience and the little human that she's in charge of raising. So being with a midwife, you know, the hour-long prenatal visits, we need to get to know you. You know, we want to know, what do you want? Like, why are you choosing to birth this way? What's important to you in your life? How can we support you in that way? And so I feel like it's almost like it's a spiritual journey as much as a physical journey, and midwives shepherd women through that with that in mind.
Hmm. Yeah, it's and you know, I don't think anything that we're saying here is like conspiratorial or necessarily calloused. It's actually the opposite of that. It's seeing this experience for what it is. And there are institutions and paradigms that are currently kind of dominating the narrative that don't really want people to have the confidence. They don't really want people to have the trust. They don't want people to be autonomous. But to have a the opportunity to have a home birth is, for many of my clients and the women who've been in my circles, they feel like it was the ultimate opportunity to establish sovereignty over their role as a mother, or even their own bodies. They've been told, you don't know, you don't, you know, you don't know. And then they said, enough. I'm going to actually make some decisions for myself. And one of those decisions might be hiring Fadwah and her team to help put them in the center of this experience and to allow it to unfold, as opposed to seeing it as a disease process, or to see it as a medical procedure. It is a shift in paradigm, and it can be very confronting. But the reality is that of the hundreds of midwives with whom I've worked, I maybe once ever was really, really disappointed with how they spoke to or treated their clients. And I have a lot of great OBGYN friends, like, don't get me wrong, but there's plenty of other reasons that OBGYNs, especially, but this also goes for midwives and labor and delivery nurses at times, there are reasons that they have to see this in the way that they treat it. And they have to use protocols, and they have to do these things based on hospital policies. And that's because their job depends on it. When you step into the midwifery model, we're not working, and I include myself now, we are not working for anybody but you. And that is a beautiful shift in consciousness and in the way that I've experienced it. And as I mentioned, my wife and I had a home birth for our second, and it was the most magical, beautiful birth. Of course, everybody says that, but like, this was just absolutely so it was so carnal. It was so like rich. It was almost like it was erotic in the sense that, like, there was so much love in the room, eros. Like, it was filled with this love. And we don't really experience that as birth workers or as the clients that we took an oath to serve. We don't really get that experience in the hospital. So perhaps we could start to shift this from the hospital system to the home birth environment as a default. That's actually my goal. That's sort of like my life's purpose, is to make sure that this becomes the default in the United States. Not for everybody in every circumstance, but the default for most. And if we need the hospital system and all these beautiful technologies that they have available to us, then of course we have them. And we have to bridge the gap there between the hospitals and the birth centers and the home birth midwives. But, this insurance thing is kind of sticky. So tell me a little bit about your new initiative, which is called remind me of the name of it again.
It's Birth Equity Resource.
birthequityresource.org. If you guys want to learn more, tell me a little bit more about this nonprofit.
Well, I want to just back up a little bit and talk about the reason that I started it. So Midwife 360 is going to be 10 in April, and
Happy
like I
birthday.
said, I started off by myself, and I came out of the doctor model. I worked for a group of doctors, 4 doctors, and there were 6 midwives, and so when I started the practice, and that's a whole nother story, I'm not going to tell that story right now. When I started my practice, I thought that what I needed to do in order to be able to get clients and really be successful was to take insurance. So I worked really hard to get on all of the panels, and it took a long time. Even one of the panels, Blue Cross Blue Shield, I didn't actually get on the panel until like 2021. And I started in 2014. But I got on the Medicaid panels and I started trying to work with this. In order to do that, a provider has to have a billing service because there's certain ways that the claims have to be filed through a clearinghouse. You have to belong to the clearinghouse. And then if you do that for yourself, which I did for a period of time, then what happens is there's always denials. Inevitably, there's denials for this, that, or the other reason. And you have to like follow up on those denials. You have to figure out first that it was denied, then you have to find the reason, and then you have to try to fix it and resubmit it. And then you can't ask about it for 60 days. They reserve the right to not get back to you for 60 days. Well, 60 days has gone by. I'm doing other births. I have other claims that I've filed. I've got other denials that I've been trying to appeal. I mean, that got to be way too much, and I couldn't do it myself. So 7 different billing scenarios. I finally end up with a company that is definitely working for me. This was in 2018, and I settled in with them, and they were doing a good job for me. But still, they would come to me and tell me, "Oh, this company, they paid you for this birth, but now they're taking the money back." And that would happen like often. Every time I would hear that, I would get like this stress response, and could just feel the adrenaline and the powerlessness and my position of what I can do about it. The billing service was really good about appealing, and they would sometimes get the money to come we needed to appeal. But the other piece of it is that, at the time, I think my prices were like 6,000 or 7,000. And the highest contract that I had with an insurance company, it was Blue Cross Blue Shield, was about 3,500 for the full journey. And when you're in network with insurance companies, you can't then turn around and say, okay, Mrs. Jones, your insurance has paid for half of our fees, but we need you to pay for the other half. You can't do that. You have to just take what the insurance gives you. And
Right.
then when you're talking about Medicaid, we were getting maybe 2,000, and we're talking the whole journey, all of the hour-long prenatal visits, plus the birth, plus the home visits before and after the birth. And it was very difficult to maintain the bank balance with
Yeah.
those types of rates coming in. So then midwives do this kind of like funky little sort of, maybe it's legal and maybe it's not. They charge an extra fee for things supposedly that insurance doesn't cover, and you can get away with that most of the time. And so we had this like extra amount that we would charge everybody across the board. It started out at 500, ultimately was about $2,000. And even with that, we were still, just with the denials and with the takebacks, it was just so complicated and so nerve wracking and just difficult to work with. So I finally decided, I made the decision multiple times. I got cold feet. I didn't do it, but I finally decided to get out of all the insurance contracts. And even that whole episode was so fraught with issues. The first company I reached out to, expecting them to give me a 30 or 60-day date in the future that I would be done with them, turned around and like took me off their contract, like immediately. And I still had clients with their insurance that I had promised we would use
Yeah.
the insurance for. So that was a whole episode. It took about 9 months to finally get out of all of the contracts. And then I found myself, it was so much work and so much effort that it was hard to see through the weeds while that was happening. But then I realized, wait a minute, what about people who can't afford to pay our fees? They really have to use their insurance, or um, for whatever reason they have a difficult time paying the amount that we are charging. So we do have a discount. We have like a 25% discount for people who qualify for Medicaid or for who otherwise have financial hardship, but even that seemed like it wasn't going to be enough.
Yeah.
So I really have a strong feeling that I don't think that home birth should only be available to people who can afford it. It just doesn't seem right to me. It should be available to everybody. Anybody who wants to have a home birth should be able to get a home birth, even if they don't have the funds. And so rather than just giving our services away and not getting paid for what we do, I decided that the right thing to do would be to start this fund. It was really, I got like a kick in the butt from a client that came at the very end of their pregnancy. And I have to tell you, like this situation, nobody else would have taken them. They had a breech baby. They had a small baby. They were being told the baby was IUGR, which is a growth restricted baby. But looking at the ultrasounds and the Doppler flows and everything, I wasn't sure that I agreed with that. I think the baby was just small. Um, and and she was also over 40. It was a first baby, and they were really getting like herded into the hospital. Go now, go now. We have to do a C-section, and she didn't. She went home. She did some research. She called me. Her and her husband came and talked to me, and she was 39 weeks pregnant. And so I agreed to take her. We had one prenatal visit, and then they went into labor a couple days later. And we had a beautiful breech birth at home, and the baby was little, but she was beautiful and healthy, and everything was fine. Um, the father of that scenario basically came back and said, thank you so much for helping us achieve this. Wow, what do people do if they can't afford it? I don't know,
I don't know.
they don't get to do this. And he said, you should do this. You should start this company here. Here's some resources. Like, let me go talk to this company. They'll help you start a nonprofit. Da, 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 da. And he kind of like pushed me down the path. And so I did it. And we've got a 501c3, which means that people can donate money and it can be tax deductible. And really, the goal of the resource is to really get well funded so that anybody who's trying to have a home birth and needs help paying for either their midwife or their doula, or even potentially their childbirth classes, any of the supportive services around birthing at home successfully, we want to help them.
Yeah.
So that's the purpose of the fund.
And so in order to utilize this fund, can anybody around the country use this fund or?
Absolutely. If we get
Wow.
well funded, like I hope it can be used across the country. I do intend to have I want the providers to register. So we're going to have some type of a feature on the website. Trust me, the website was formed within the last month, and we're planning this big event that I'm going to talk about in a second. But so all of our energies and resources are going towards creating this event and making that happen. But once the dust settles from that, we'll have a registration form on the site for the providers, because we want to know who the providers are. And I don't think we're going to make a distinction between licensed and unlicensed and traditional, all of that. I would like to support even traditional midwives, but I want to see that they also have some skin in the game in terms of giving a discount off of their fees. We extend a 25% discount if people have financial difficulty, and so we start there. And then if they need to apply for a scholarship, my hope is that we can we can pay for maybe half of that, and then maybe they can come up with the rest. I think it is important, like the midwives need to have skin in the game, the clients need to have skin in the game. Like when
Yeah.
something is just handed to you for free, I
Right.
think you just really don't appreciate it as much as if you're paying something for it. So though that what that something is going to be different for every family. But we want
Yeah.
to be able to help them and then see that birth workers get paid and can survive doing this work and not just giving it away all the time.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to unpack there. A lot of people, they criticize, individuals like this. And by the way, you're above the national average for what you charge, I'm sure. But you also have earned this sort of position where you're probably one of the best birth workers in the country. I'm just going to say it because you've attended so many births. And I know you go to trainings. You were desperate. You coughed up money last minute to come to this breech conference, and you're going to be back, and you're helping me plan that. Like, you're invested in this, and that time that you're putting towards your advocacy and forming these programs, that's also time that you're not necessarily getting paid for up front. That is equity. And so you're charging $8,000. I charge 10,000. And it's not because I think I'm special or better. It's because I want to disincentivize people from hiring me. And I have people that are willing to pay that. Now, if I travel, I charge 20,000. And people would say, that's insane to go out there for 3 weeks. But listen, I'm taking time away from my little girls. They're only going to be 2 and 4 for so long. Every single moment that I'm away, even right now, I'm missing out on the opportunity to be their dad. But then also, I can't take other births when I travel. And because people are willing to pay $10K for local births or $20K for travel births, that actually gives me the ability to give away care to other people. Because there are people out there that are willing to pay these higher ticket prices. But then when somebody comes around who just can't make this work, it's so nice to know that a part of, on top of everything else that you're doing, that you're actually trying to make this an option for everybody. I do the same thing with the conferences. People are like, I just can't afford it. I'm like, well, what can you afford? Do you want to come and do some work exchange? Do you want to go and get 3 friends to sign up, and then I can give you a group discount? Like, there's a way to do this, but you also have to be in it. If I'm in it, you have to be in it with me.
Yeah.
And so this idea that we should be giving away our care, or that you shouldn't be charging, that's bullshit. You wouldn't go to the car mechanic, which is not even a sacred rite of passage, and say, I demand that you give me free advice. Like, no, you have to actually buy in to this process. And in some ways, and it's interesting, Fadwah, in some ways, the fact that we've become so reliant on health insurance has there's this veil over our eyes as to what it actually costs to pay a well-educated, experienced professional to be there with you, and maybe even to keep their hands off. Like, you're not paying me for the 5-minute appendectomy as a general surgeon. You're paying me for all of the years of practice and experience to make sure that I can do this surgery quickly, efficiently, and get you out the door on your feet. So we have a strange value system that is skewed because we've become so reliant on health insurance for nearly everything. And then when you have to pay out of pocket, suddenly everybody's up in arms. Like, well,
Yeah.
if you want to go to the hospital, you can have that, but that's going to get you a different experience.
Yeah.
And what Fadwah and her team do at Midwife 360 is not that.
I used to say, before I got out of the insurance business, I used to lament the fact, I'm like, I wish I was a plumber. I would go,
Yeah.
I would do my work, I would get paid. Like,
Yeah.
that's normal, right? But that wasn't my world. Like, we did all this work and maybe we would get paid,
Yeah.
and I couldn't live with that anymore. So I don't believe in the insurance industry. So I felt like a hypocrite participating in it.
Yeah.
So no longer.
Yeah, we have catastrophic coverage. I ride a motorcycle. Things can happen that we're going to really need our health insurance, but we have a very, very low premium, very high deductible plan now. And now that I'm completely independent of any employer, I could just go on the marketplace and find something that worked. But we don't have dental insurance. And this was hard for my wife and I, because it was like, gosh, how many times have we used our dental insurance? But interestingly, when you actually pay out of pocket and they know you're paying out of pocket, you get a smaller bill. You get a $160 cleaning from a biologic dentist that has a 6-month waiting list. Like, they're doing good work. And if you're willing to step in and pay for your preventative care, you also don't even need that catastrophic coverage. It's less likely you would need it. And if that thing happens, it's fine. But every little bit of this work is a gamble. And there's no guarantee in childbirth or in your dental care. There's no guarantee that you're not going to need a dental transplant. But man, I was just there yesterday. And she was like, after I had Invisalign, these invisible braces, I had a tooth chipped because the conventional dentist shaved down one of my front teeth and it thinned it out. And so she was like, let's fix this up. And I was like, well, I'm okay with that. But if it's going to be like $5,000, I better at least run it by my wife and make sure that we're okay with that expense right now. And she was like, oh, no, it's not going to be that. You pay out of pocket, right? And she wasn't saying like, I'm going to gouge the insurance companies. But because she can gouge the insurance companies when people come to her who have their hard-earned money, she want to make sure that she's doing the right thing in honoring that. And it would only ends up being like $500 or something to get this whole tooth reconstructed. And when you add up the premiums from insurance for a year of premiums, it might be $200 a month. And so we've coughed up $2,400 and we've spent what, 600? It's actually in many ways more affordable to take care of yourself if you're paying out of pocket, and it connects you with the value of your dollar. And it sort of incentivizes you to do the things that are going to minimize the likelihood that you're going to need that induction or that C-section, or that your baby's going to have placental issues or whatever else. So anyways, we could probably talk about that for hours. Anything you wanted to comment there, and then we can wrap it up.
Just that I think that most people don't really understand how insurance works.
Yeah.
And actually, like, in terms of gouging the insurance companies, like, I don't even know if that's a thing, because in my experience, when you're in network, they tell you what your contracted rate is for your
Yeah.
CPT codes. And so, and it's not like you can just stack a bunch of CPT codes. Like, if they're seeing more than they think that they should be seeing, they're going to ask for records and they're going to make a decision. And so in obstetrics, what we always looked at was that 59400, that global maternity. That's the CPT
Yeah.
code,
Like the
where
package, the
they pay
episode
for
package. Yeah.
that's the prenatal care, the birth, the postpartum care. That's the money. So no matter what I could say in my claim that I'm charging 10 grand for that. It doesn't matter. They're only going to pay me what my contracted rate is. So it doesn't, like, even the hospital sending like a padded claim or whatever for 18 grand, like, they're going to get what their contracted rate is. The thing is that hospitals are big and powerful, and they've probably been able to negotiate a pretty good contracted rate compared to someone like me who has a little home birth practice where I didn't really have a say in what
Yeah.
my contracted rate was. And that is, I would say, the case for majority of birth centers and other midwives around the country, is they don't get to have a say in their contracted rate, which is one of the reasons that insurance just doesn't really work well
Right.
for people
Right.
like us. It works
Yeah.
maybe well for hospitals and maybe well for like pharmaceutical companies and people like that, but it doesn't work for individual providers or individuals in general.
Yeah, there was this video, there's this show, I don't know if it's still on TV, but it's called Adam Ruins Everything. And he has there's a snapshot where he actually in like 5 minutes unpacks this conundrum of how healthcare economics works. And while the private doctor isn't gouging the insurance companies, those fees that the insurance company is as advertising as what they charge for things and what the cost to you is and everything, that actually is not true in the hospital setting, because there's a separate contract between the hospital and the insurer, which is why some hospitals are out of network. They haven't negotiated a contract. But if they're in network, that bill that would go to your insurance company, as we already described before, is going to look a lot different from a bill that would be directly to you if they were charging a client directly. But so few people go to the hospital paying out of pocket because, frankly, oftentimes they don't do that. They give you the original bill and people are like, what the fuck? $18,000 for a couple Band-Aids in the ED. And so there's this fear that if I need emergency care, I'm not going to be able to afford it. So therefore I need insurance. That kind of keeps us on the wheel. But how many of your clients who are giving birth are people that frequent the ED? Probably very, very few.
Yeah.
So man, it's a gamble. And even if you look at like life insurance, I'm in this conversation now between term life and whole life and universal index life and all this. And term life insurance is great if you die before the end of the term. But at the end of the term, it's gone. Every bit of those premiums just disappears. And that happened to my mom, my wife's father. So this insurance thing is tricky. And I'm glad that you're starting to model for other midwives. And I hope any midwife or anybody really listening will find a way to reach out to you and have a conversation around moving towards a direct pay model if they're inspired. Fadwah, I just want to wrap up and say thank you. I hold a very special place for you in my heart. I really, really trust the work that you're doing. And I'm so excited to have you coming back out to the Born Free Twins-Breech Conference. We've got a spot secured for you. If you guys haven't heard, in August, as of right now, we're in March 2024. In August, Fadwah and about 149 other attendees. You're going to come and see about 20 speakers talk about the intricacies of breech in twins birth, but also there's going to be a whole bunch of activities there to help support the birth workers themselves who are carrying around a burden of trauma and distaste from a lot of the mechanisms that you and I have talked about in this conversation today. So if you want to go and check that out, it's Born Free Twins-Breech. You can meet Fadwah in person if you're fangirling or fanboying right now. Fadwah, Instagram is at midwife360. But tell people where they can find your practice and where they can find the birth equity resource program that you started.
Yeah, the practice is in West Palm Beach, Florida. We go as far as Miami for birth, and as far north as Vero. Not my favorite. Nothing wrong with Vero, but it's a long ways to drive. And also, I'm super excited about the conference coming up in August. I can't wait to gather again with the amazing group of people. But also, we have this event coming up April 1st. And Nathan, I'm really excited about you coming out here for that and speaking for that. So it's a birthday party. It's a gratitude gift for our clients of 10 years of service to the community and just having loyalty. We get so many clients that come back for their second, third, fourth babies. And we wanted to have a party as a thank you. So we're throwing a sort of a festival vibe day-long party in the park in West Palm Beach, Dreher Park on April 6th. There's going to be speakers, entertainment, community sound bath, community acupuncture, vendors, food. It's going to be a blast. So check out birthequityresource.org for all of the information about the event. Check out Midwife 360. We're on Instagram. We have a great website as well. And really looking forward to connecting with some of you.
Amazing. Yeah, I will be speaking there. I got to tell you, I'm always intimidated speaking in front of crowds of birth workers because I kind of feel like an imposter. People bring me on as like a childbirth expert. But what I tell people, I've started to have to reiterate this. I am no expert in childbirth. If you've had a baby, you are an expert in childbirth, and I'm just here to serve you. So it's going to be a lot of fun. I hope some people who are local, if you can make it down to Florida, come and meet me in Fadwah. I'm going to be staying with Fadwah for a night too. So I get to hang out with you and we can compare our tattoo stories and all of that. So
and take a sauna.
Yeah, and get in the sauna. That'd be amazing. Fadwah, thank you. You're a real treat. And I'm really looking forward to continue working with you in the future.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.